it is my absolute honor to introduce our first speaker. I'd like to invite you to give a warm welcome in the chat to Sunny Graff. Her session is Lessons I've Learned, 55 Years of Empowerment Self-Defense. Sunny is a pioneering martial artist and foundational empowerment self-defense leader with over 55 years of experience, holding 29 black belt levels across 6 disciplines, including senior grandmaster in Taekwondo. She founded the Columbus Rape Crisis Center and co-funded the National Women's Martial Arts Federation, and currently runs the Frankfurt-based nonprofit Women in Movement. And she's a beautiful t-shirt today. You can read more about Sunny's profile on our speakers page on the ESD Europe website. So let's continue. Lessons I've Learned, 55 years of ESD. Sunny, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I say thank you very much to the organizers of this wonderful event, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to everyone tonight. I am excited about sharing my martial arts journey and my self-defense journey, and hopefully some of the lessons that I've learned along the way will help you both through my successes and my failures. There's always something to be learned. I came to Germany in 1984. I originally come from Columbus, Ohio. I'm an American. I got my Master of Laws at Columbia University, and I got a fellowship to come study here for a year. That was the plan. As all plans go, it had a different ending. I realized when I got here to Frankfurt that there was an enormous demand for self-defense and martial arts for women and girls, and very, very few teachers. So it was like kind of like a no-brainer. I immediately stayed, and in 1985, I started my school in Frankfurt called Women in Movement. It was from the very beginning. I started it with a Black German woman, Ike Hugo Marshall, and our goal was to create a safe space for women and girls to learn to be strong and to learn community and solidarity and to be together and just to make the best of ourselves that we could be. And we have been teaching now for 41 years. We celebrated last year our big 40th anniversary. We have almost 400 students ranging in age from 4 to 76. We have 40 volunteer teachers who do empowerment martial arts and empowerment self-defense. We offer classes for women and girls of every age. We do free violence prevention workshops for girls in elementary schools and in, let's see, what do you call it here? The next level, middle school, I guess it would be called. I have to apologize. I teach all the time in German. I only speak German. I'm 24/7 German teaching, and sometimes I really have to translate back, so bear with me. Our work is intersectional and it's inclusive. We have a diverse teaching staff, and we offer courses for Turkish women, for Black girls and women, for the queer community, women and girls with disabilities. It's important for us to do outreach to all communities because empowerment self-defense is for everyone. I have trained over 360 feminist, anti-racist empowerment self-defense teachers. We call our course Feminist Anti-Racist because I want to be really clear that a lot of the harassment, abuse, and violence that women face are not only based on sexism, but many other aspects of their lives. So I think it's very important to work intersectionally and make sure that we're dealing with the issues that women really need to deal with in their lives. So I started, let me start where I want to go way back to. Let me start in 1969. I got arrested at a protest at Ohio State University against the Vietnam War for inciting to riot. And that was a first-degree felony, and that was so way overcharged because I basically just kind of went along with the crowd. I wasn't inciting anybody to do anything, but it was like a big thing. And it radicalized me. And I figured I better learn where Vietnam is. I better learn what's going on because now I'm like this big rioter. So I became a ferocious advocate for ending the war, and I became active in leftist and community politics and started writing for an underground newspaper, the Columbus Free Press. The following summer break, I hitchhiked to a rock concert in Pennsylvania to meet up with some of my friends. My friend Christina, who I had known since our kindergarten days and who was planning to room with me at Ohio State University in the fall, never showed up. We later found out that she was murdered along the way. She and a girlfriend were both found by the side of the road. Christine was dead, and the other woman had such severe head trauma that she never got a memory back about what actually happened. Christine's murder was horrible enough, but the reaction of my friends and family made it even worse. They acted like Christina committed suicide. What did she expect? She was hitchhiking. She brought it on herself. It was her own fault. My family tried to limit my mobility. I'm sure they were trying to do it to protect me, but I wasn't having any part of it. Yeah. We were teenagers. We wanted to break out of our sheltered existence. We wanted to experience the world. And hitchhiking was a big part of breaking free and being adventurous. All of my male friends hitchhiked, and they weren't being murdered. It felt so unfair. It made me so angry. Nobody talked about the man or the men who killed my friend. Christine's murder occurred at a time when there was no women's movement. There were no rape crisis centers and no women's shelters. There was no feminist consciousness about violence against women. I was very fearful, but my anger was bigger, and I refused to let this murderer constrain my life and take away my freedom as well as Christine's. So I continued to hitchhike, and I continue to engage in incredibly risky behavior. I feel very fortunate that I made it out alive because I had nothing other than my anger to defend myself. When I was waitressing, the boss of the restaurant got me in a back hallway and started fondling my breasts. And the only thing I could give him was a submissive smile. I was completely unable to handle myself. And then came the women's movement. Thanks to a friend of mine, a fellow cheerleader from back in high school, she told me, Sonny, you got to check this out. This is really good stuff. So I did. And I remember going into the first meeting and coming out crying. I was so happy to find other women who were talking about things that were real, that were important, that weren't makeup or boys or all that other kinds of stuff. We organized in consciousness raising groups at the very beginning. And for those who don't know, it was small groups of women coming together. We would meet sometimes twice a week, sometimes every week, and we talked about our lives. And the most overriding theme was the personal is political, and the things that affected each of us individually weren't just individual problems that we had, but there was a political dimension to it as well. The first time someone talked about violence in our group, we all laughed uncomfortably and looked at the ground. And then the stories started pouring out. We had all been touched by violence. Toni Goman, a young mother in the group, went on vacation in California with a male friend and never returned. Her dismembered body was thrown in the ocean and recovered piece by piece. She left a 7-year-old son. The case was never solved, but there were indications that she'd been trafficked and killed for pleasure. There were many wrongs in the women's movement that needed to be righted, but from the very beginning, violence was my main issue. At the beginning, we only talked about rape and murder from strangers because that's all there was. That's all there was in our consciousness. Nobody talked about anything else. That's all that was talked about. We were angry about the violence and we were politically active. We were making rape a public issue. We were doing rape speakouts, take back the night marches, and demanding prosecution of rapists and help for victims. The rape speakouts were the same old. Everybody had a story, but it really was only stranger rape at first. We started a rape crisis center for victims of violence. It was one of the first in the country. And we named it after Toni Goman, our friend who had been murdered. Because we had no money for an office, the first crisis telephone was in my home. It was my private telephone number. And when it rang day and night, I never knew who was going to be on the other end. When women were raped, we went with them to the police or to the hospital or just to their homes and talked to them. It didn't take long for me to totally burn out. I was incapable of taking my rubbish out at night into the bins in the backyard without being armed with, pepper spray and whatever. I was terrified to leave my house. Eventually, we got an office space in a local church, and we trained 75 women to be crisis counselors and victim advocates. And I think it's probably hard for all of you to imagine, but at first, it never even occurred to us that we could fight back on a physical level. It never even occurred to us. We had been socialized to be perfect victims. The learned helplessness was just incredible. Girls did cheerleading and modern dance instead of sports to strengthen our bodies. We were taught to be thin, pretty, quiet, and to get the attention of men. Marriage was the goal in life, and young women were in competition with each other to get the best catch. At Ohio State University, where I did my undergraduate work, there was a huge bridal fair every year, which drew 4,500 women. It was a wedding market complete with bridal gowns and crystal and cookware and pots and pans, all the important things that young women needed for their hope chests, for their inevitable marriage. For feminist activists, it was also a huge event with days and days of protests, later also with gay activists, until the university finally shut the bridal fair down in 1973. We were very proud of that. At the time, and still today, the socialization is gender indoctrination. To be fair, why would we think we had a chance against an attacker? We only heard about women who had been raped, murdered, or both. We had all experienced it in our own lives. We had no success stories of women fighting back and getting away. We had no role models of strong, competent women, let alone women as warriors. The police were the experts on rape, and they and the rest of society told us clearly, don't fight back. Better rape than dead. We were presented with this binary choice, rape or death. Of course, no one fought back. Nobody wanted to die. I don't think I can stress enough how revolutionary it was to even question this paradigm. It took incredible courage and imagination to think outside the box, to even question if perhaps in addition to rape and death, there might be a third option. What about fighting back? Maybe escape? It was an audacious question and completely outside the realm of possibility. Women couldn't fight back and would never have a chance against an attacker, against any man. Ours was not a bold assertion or a declaration of war. It was a whispered question. Do you think it would be possible to fight back? I don't know. What do you think? A whispered maybe was better than no chance at all. The more we pondered the question, the braver we became. I can give you an example from my own experience, which just shows how deep the socialization, the indoctrination was. I was hitchhiking, and the guy who picked me up pulled out a gun from under the seat to intimidate me. He thoroughly succeeded. I was completely intimidated. He took the gun and put it on the dashboard. Eventually, he let me out of the car without raping me, but it was definitely his choice. It was years later in self-defense training that I realized that the gun was a neutral object. In theory, I could have picked up the gun and pointed it at him, but only in theory, because in reality, I was so socialized into my role, into the victimization, that it never even occurred to me that I could use the weapon. I saw the weapon like this. It didn't occur to me to pick it up. In that car, my complete indoctrination took over. And I saw that gun in between my eyes. I was incapable of taking it in my own hands and unable to defend myself. Once the idea, though, was planted in our brains that fighting back might be a strategy, I started looking for self-defense classes. There were none. I checked out every book in the library about self-defense. There were two, one judo and one self-defense from a judo man named Bruce Tegner. None of it was applicable to my life. I persisted and I found a female yellow belt in Kung Fu, an absolute beginner who taught a class for us at the Rape Crisis Center. She didn't have many skills, but what she had, she shared with us, at least until it was revealed that she was a police informant. Since we had no experts, my plan then was to become the expert. I decided to be a spy for the women's movement. I decided to infiltrate the male martial arts world, steal their secrets, and bring them back to the feminist movement. Martial arts was just beginning to take hold in the States. I visited a few karate and judo schools, all male, and I got hit on by the instructors who couldn't keep their lecherous eyes and their hands off me. They all offered me private lessons. It was frustrating because I was trying to learn how to defend myself against men like them. Finally, I found a Korean Kung Fu school where I could train. It was pretty much all male, and there wasn't even a changing room for women. I had to put my uniform on in the restroom. The training was hierarchical and regimented, but at no time did I experience sexual harassment from the masters. That was a big step up. Even though they sometimes didn't know what to do with me, a young radical feminist, there was a basis of respect in the school. My plan to steal the secrets and run failed for two reasons. Number one, I absolutely fell in love with the beauty and the strength and the fluidity of the martial arts. I was hooked from my very first class. After just a month, I bought a lifetime membership for $499, including a free uniform. It was a huge sum of money back then for a student, but it was the best deal of my life. I've been there for over 50 years. I know when I found something good. The second reason my plan failed was I failed to find any meaningful self-defense that I could steal. We practiced martial sports. There were rules, no hitting to the groin or to the eyes. My teachers were young Korean men who had been training since they were children. They didn't know anything about fear, and they knew nothing about the socialization into helplessness that women endured. They could not help me overcome my fear and reprogram myself. I realized that meaningful self-defense had to come from feminists. We had to be our own role models and create techniques that spoke to the reality of our own lives. And so we did. In the mid-1970s, Women Against Rape got a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health. We did a project called Community Action Strategies to Stop Rape. We were very fortunate to get that grant because it let us do really, really, really good work. 7 women spent 3 years studying the causes of rape and developing primary prevention strategies to stop violence against women. We did research on rape. We organized our community with a whistle alert program and women's shelter houses. We developed prevention workshops for women, and I taught the physical skills component. By far, the most valuable part of the program we developed was what we call confrontation training, which included body language, eye contact, assertiveness skills, verbal skills to stop harassment before an attacker can escalate his assault. We practiced assertiveness skills and developed role play scenarios. We learned to confront sexism and racism. Our ability to handle everyday harassment increased our self-esteem. Around the same time, a handful of other martial artists and I founded the National Women's Martial Arts Federation. It was the first national association of feminist and female martial artists. There were so few of us doing martial arts and self-defense back then. We really needed each other's support and encouragement to survive patriarchal martial arts. We formed very deep bonds. Most of the original founders are still teaching and are still my friends. It was here I met my first black belt women. I'd never seen one before. I thought they were awesome. I was in awe. One weekend, coming home from a gathering, our car had mechanical problems, so we pulled into a gas station to get service. I remember how the men at the station totally harassed these black belt women. There were no jumping, spinning kicks, no palm heels to the nose. Everyone remained silent and stared at the ground and pretended they didn't notice. It was then I realized how unique and valuable the confrontation was that we were doing in Columbus, Ohio. And I began teaching it at our NWMAF special trainings. It became the basis for many of the self-defense programs in the USA. We shared our skills and we grew together. While some instructors choose to rename it de-escalation training, I still prefer confrontation training. I do not want to de-escalate misogyny, racism, and other forms of discrimination. I want to confront and stop it. There are 3 reasons that I'll go through briefly why we need to practice confrontation training. The first reason is it could be a test for further violence. In the test phase, men use harassment to see how a woman will respond. It could be that a man follows a woman or makes a sexist or racist remark to see if she's in a position to be able to handle it or to show resistance. If not, he can feel emboldened to continue his assault. The second reason is victim training. If we don't respond in situations of everyday harassment, we learn what our role is in the society. We learn that we're victims and that basically men can do with us what they want. So it's really important to have the efficacy to handle those kinds of situations because it makes us sick. It makes us sick if we don't handle the everyday harassment. We just swallow it down and it stays in us and it makes us kaput. That's German. So and the third reason is if we don't react to those everyday situations, if it's somebody making derogatory eye contact with you and we look down and we don't respond to it, we're just reinforcing patriarchy. Every one of those little interactions is going to reinforce the structures, the power structures. So we need to learn to confront. Same thing with racism. Somebody says something racist, confront it immediately because if we're not confronting it, we're condoning it. One of the important contributions of CASR, which is Community Action Strategies to Stop Rape, was Freeing Our Lives.
It's good.
Freeing Our Lives. I think it's an incredible contribution to violence prevention, and I would recommend people read it, even though you've got to remember it was in the 70s. I'm still very proud of it. You can Google it, and you can get it for free online. So one of the things we did was redefine rape and violence against women. That was a lot of myths and facts, and back in the day, we spent a lot of time doing myths and facts and moving from personal shame to political issue. That was a really, really important part of redefining rape. And we went from rape to other forms of violence. And that came mostly out of our experience in the Rape Crisis Center. At the time, there was no sexual harassment in the workplace. There was no date rape. There was no domestic violence or intimate partner violence. There was no child sexual assault. We had no words for the violence that was done to women and girls because it was never openly talked about. We didn't know. I remember the first time I ran the Rape Crisis Center, and I remember the first time we got a call about a girl, which was shocking enough that it was a girl, and the perpetrator was her father. We were completely unprepared to handle that scenario. And we were the experts at that time. We were shocked. And that was the impetus to start a new organization, the CAP project, the Child Assault Prevention Project. It became a national prevention program and eventually international. I'm very proud of the work we did in Columbus, Ohio. The CASA project also identified factors that perpetuate women's vulnerability to violence. That included physical and psychological factors, social, economic, and political factors. We posited that violence against women was the muscle, the force that reinforces patriarchy. And it's not that individual rapists go out thinking, hey, I'm going to strike a blow for patriarchy and rape a woman tonight. But the fact that some women rape and others ignore and benefit from it leaves all women vulnerable. And to get rid of patriarchy, we need to eliminate violence. So we had the theory down, then came the practice. When I started teaching, I assumed that no one had ever been attacked and we were training to keep it that way. First mistake. Yeah. Now I assume absolutely the opposite. I go in thinking every woman's had an experience with violence, and we're here to learn how we can protect ourselves going forward. It just shows how important it is to be as sensitive to trauma as possible when we teach. In my first prevention course, we were in a cold, dark basement in the local church because that was the only space we could get. Almost immediately, one of the participants recalled a repressed memory of sexual abuse by her uncle. It was new land for us. We didn't know, but fortunately, there were several of us who were crisis counselors, so we could be there for her. I learned, find a nice, bright, happy place to do our courses and be prepared because women are going to be sharing their experiences and we need to know how to deal with those situations. In one of my first 12-week courses, I had a blind woman. I had never taught a self-defense course, and now I was teaching women with disabilities. It was very challenging, but it made me be flexible and versatile from day one. Have to reinforce this idea again that I was telling women to fight back based on nothing but my firm belief that there had to be a better option than relax so you don't get killed. We were terrified that we might be giving women the wrong information. As brave as we were saying fight back, we really didn't know. We really weren't sure. And it took us a long time to get over that fear. For years, for example, I would say fight back. But if he has a weapon, I don't know, you got to kind of figure it out for yourself because I was afraid to give women the wrong information. That is why I am so happy when the first research came out to quell all my fears. It was so important. Pauline Bart and Patricia O'Brien came out, I really don't even know what year it was, but they came out with Stopping Rape. And it was the first research, and they researched it was really valuable research. And if anybody hasn't read it, I would really recommend you read it. You can also get summaries of it online, but they talked to 100 women, 50 of whom had been raped and 50 of who had not been raped. And they tried to figure out what is the difference between the women who got away and those who didn't. And there were many, many important things that came out of that research, but it completely invigorated us to be even more strongly say fighting back is a very good option. And I want to give a shout out here to all the women who've been doing this great self-defense research. And there are many of them, and they're all over the world, and they've been doing such great stuff. You really have our backs, and thank you so much for that, because they're doing great work, and it informs the work that we're doing every day. So thank you. I can now say with total confidence that, fighting back is what we need to do. We have the science to back it up, and resistance takes many, many forms. It's not always physical fighting. In my experience with violence, I've identified 5 phases of violence that I'm going to share with you now. First is the planning stage. The attacker plans his violence, and this was important to emphasize because we were always told that men were so smitten with our beauty that they just, were overwhelmed with the sexual urge and they just had to rape us. They plan it down to the detail. They know exactly what they're doing. They do it deliberately. The second phase is the selection phase. They look for a woman who they believe will not offer resistance. And I say it in exactly that way because maybe they're looking for what they would consider a victim, but it has nothing to do with us, right? It has to do with their perceptions and nothing to do with the actual person who is attacked. It's important in this phase that we pay attention to body language, how we walk in the world, how we take up space, how we present ourselves. I'm going to say it anyhow, even though I'm sure none of you need this, but it doesn't matter what we wear, where we go, how we look, how we dress, what we drink. Nobody's got a right to be violent to you. It's never our fault. It's always the fault of the attacker. And I'm sure you all know that, but I always have to say it anyhow. So then we come to the testing phase. I mentioned before in confrontation training that men test to see how we respond in situations. And if they feel that there's no resistance coming, they feel emboldened and continue with their violence. And that's one of the important things from the lessons of empowerment self-defense, is that being upfront, being confrontative, being strong, being loud, de-escalate situations. Yeah, it's not going to encourage men to have more violence. And even today, the most important thing that I can say in my classes is if you resist, men will not get angry. They are already angry. They're angry, and if we don't resist, they'll let out their anger on our bodies. So it's really important to emphasize the fact that resistance does not cause an escalation. Resistance causes the end of the violence. So that's the testing phase, and then we can learn to confront and stop violence and harassment before the attacker can escalate his assault. Then there's the isolation phase. The attacker tries to get the girl or the woman alone. And the final phase is the physical violence. And so what's important about this is that we have so many chances to resist and to stop violence before we get to the physical stage. And that's, of course, the difference between empowerment self-defense and what you would find in a karate school or whatever, is that we don't focus just on physical techniques. We talk about the entire range of violence that women experience in our lives. And physical fighting is an important aspect of it, but not the main one. We have many, many chances before it comes to a physical fight. So now some lessons. These are kind of in random order, and just my thoughts I jotted down. Be brave. Don't compromise. Say your truth and let the chips fall where they may. You don't have to smile when somebody's standing on your neck. You just have to be clear. We need to make allies. But one of the things that we found at the very beginning, that was, don't lean to the right. Very often people on the right will try to make our cause their cause, and that never goes well. Because we were talking about incarcerating rapists, getting the criminal justice system to respond to women's needs. You will find people on the right who are saying exactly the same things, but have a completely different agenda. So it's important to be conscious about what it is that we really need. Because at the same time I was doing my rape crisis center work, I was also doing jail reform. And I think it's important to know who it is that we're dealing with. I think defending women's spaces is so important. Women's spaces can be easily defeated with money, with grants. I've seen it happen many times that volunteer organizations get funded, and once they get funded and everybody gets a job, the funding gets pulled, and the organization that was running on volunteer labor and energy folds. And I think that's a really important point to think about. I think about it all the time because my organization has been well funded now, and it scares me. It really scares me. So solidarity with other women. We need to make every woman who comes into our classes into a revolutionary. I don't want them going out thinking that self-defense has anything to do with self. It has to do with all of us. And we have to make them into feminist revolutionaries. We have to go out and end patriarchy together. And we've got to get women involved in political action. And we need alliances with other teachers, which is why this is a great organization. And I'll talk in a minute about other organizations. Set your own price and keep it. That was something I learned when I got to Germany. Everybody called me and said, I want you to do a class and I can only pay you 10 euros an hour. And I said, sorry, I can't do it for that. And I named my price and I said, no, I want 100 euros an hour. And they said, no, this is crazy. Nobody gets that kind of money. You can't possibly do that. So I did one of two things. I either did things for free. If I thought it was really important and I wanted to do it, I would do it for free, or I would charge them 100 euros an hour. Yeah. A year later, everybody who had called me and said it was absolutely not possible for me to get 100 euros an hour said, oh, no problem. Because I had been doing good work and I had a reputation and the courses were doing great. So you might have to hold out a little bit for a while till you get established. But if you start nickel and diming yourself, you're never going to be able to make a living doing this. And I don't know how many of you are making a living doing this or not, but if you plan on making a living, you have to be able to charge the money that you're worth. And we are definitely worth it. So, and for those of you who are teaching teachers, I think it's really important to say, don't control your students. And I say this coming from the male martial arts model of organization. It was very much about controlling the students and making them work in the school and, you know, this and that and the other thing. And I chose to go a different direction. I said it's been about 360 self-defense instructors that I've taught, and they are all on their own. They're doing great work all over the world, and I'm very happy, but I don't feel a need to have any kind of control. I think it's really important that the most important aspect, I think, is the psychological, and it's much more important even than the physical, because if our minds aren't ready to fight, our bodies aren't going to do anything. And I've seen it over and over and over again, is that women who do martial arts are not necessarily in any kind of a position to be able to defend themselves, because that's not taught in traditional martial arts schools. And the work that we need to do is change our minds. You know, all that conditioning is to like be conscious of it and to get rid of it. I point out the victim role all the time and talk about it all the time and talk about ways that we can combat it, that we think our own thoughts. Nobody else can think your thoughts for you. You're the only one. And if your thoughts are not taking you forward, we need to change them. Yeah. So we do a lot of verbalization, we do affirmations, we do visualization, we do all kinds of things to change your mind. We need to be our own coaches. We need to think better thoughts and be our own coaches. And I like the saying from Jesse Jackson, it doesn't matter who put you down, it's your responsibility to get back up. And I think that applies to us all the time. At 50 years ago, it was important to claim the victim narrative, because the alternative was being responsible for the violence. And that's why we said, no, we're not responsible, we're victims. But victimhood is a trap. Victims have no agency. Survivors is also not a word that every woman can relate to. But what's important is the concept that we don't dwell on victimization. We don't do therapy. We get mad and we get moving. And I get really upset at the notion that women who've experienced violence have to be in therapy for the rest of their freaking lives. I think we should get mad. I think we should get mad and we should get on with the business of ending patriarchy. So we need to speak about violence because it has control over us when we don't. So we need to name names and we need to talk about what happened to us, because every single time we relate our stories, it has less power over us. I also think this is another. Don't protect attackers, name their names. I also think that passivity is not a choice. Women who say, I choose to be nonviolent. It's not an option unless you know how to fight and how to kill. Then it's an option. But until that time, it's a forced choice. I said psychological is more important than physical, but they go hand in hand. Simone de Beauvoir said a revolution that doesn't get in the muscles doesn't have a chance. Women need to feel each other's power. They need to hold paddles for each other. They need to hold the big bags so that when somebody jams an elbow against, they feel it in their bodies, how much strength we have. It takes, I don't think you have to be a martial artist to be an empowerment self-defense teacher, but it helps. There's power to be had and lessons to be learned in the martial arts. An ESD teacher needs to be a role model, and she needs to be convincing when she demonstrates, and she needs to have a certain level of physical competency. That said, I never do self-defense in a martial arts uniform, ever. I don't want to leave the impression that you have to train for years to defend yourself. We don't, but I want self-defense, empowerment self-defense teachers to show, to demonstrate, to embody that what we want. I always say I can make every feminist an empowerment self-defense instructor, but I can't make every sports teacher or martial artist a feminist. And what we need is really strong feminists. That's what's most important. I want to mention visualization. It wasn't a thing back then when I started, but it was so important in my own journey that I want to mention it. I had a dream once. I'd been doing martial arts for I don't know how long. I had a dream. Somebody came in my bedroom, was going to attack me. I went down into a fetal position, did nothing in my dream. I woke up. I was so disappointed in myself. It's like I could punch and kick and, do all these great, crazy things, And there I was in my mind, in my dreams, being totally helpless. So I started thinking in my head, like rethinking situations. And every time I'd be in a situation where I thought maybe, I was scared. I thought maybe somebody was going to attack me or something, or it could happen. Somebody could jump out from the next bush or whatever. We were still by stranger rate back then. And I would stop, breathe, see the situation in my head and put a different ending on it and see myself fighting back and punching and kicking and, getting out of the situation. I did that for a while. And then I had another dream. And in the dream, I was like awesome. And I, like wrapped up a bunch of guys like in little packages and stuff. So like the dreams are like that, right? But it was really important for me because after that, I could defend myself because I saw myself being successful, right? Maybe it sounds crazy, but it was visualization is a part of every class that I teach because I think it's such an important tool that we start seeing ourselves differently. Okay. And I also think something really important is that we warn women that we teach what will happen when they come home and men want to train with them. Their husbands will say, show me what you learned or show me this or that. And they said, how did your boyfriend react when you started doing self-defense? And I said, he was fine with it because that's what I was doing when I met him. It wasn't an issue, right? I didn't understand what was behind her question. And what was behind her question was she went home and her husband raped her. And he couldn't, they were a little hippie couple and they were, like long skirts and long hair and baking bread and living in the country. And, that whole hippie dream there, it was like, how could that be? Like I didn't know at the time that men did things like that with their wives. We did not know, but it made me realize that even in relationships that don't have any level of violence, it happens because women are in the subordinate position. And as long as we remain there, everything's fine. And when women start to break out of that position, men can be violent, even men that were not violent before. So I think it's important to tell women about what can happen and tell them not to engage. Because even men that say, I'm going to pay attention to the children today and you can go off and do your self-defense, they won't let go of it until they get the woman in a position, right? And if she's taken a candle making course, she'll go, oh, we learned this candle technique. He's like, I don't care, But if she does self-defense, he'll go, show me, what did you learn? What did you learn? And he won't let go until he's in a position of showing her that no matter what she learned, one of two things is going to happen. Either she hasn't learned how to get out of the hold that he put on her yet, or she would have to hurt him to get out of the hold. And even if she's annoyed with him that he's being like that and herself for engaging, she's not willing to hurt him. So it's important to tell women, don't engage. I don't think men should teach women self-defense. Full stop. Let them work with men. When I've known many men who I would say are nice men who've done terrible jobs of teaching women self-defense because they are not role models. They're not what we need. I know when I walk into a room, the first thing I notice is if there are any other women there. There's this identification factor that is so important, which is why I teach Black women and Muslim women and disabled women, because I want them to have those role models. I can't do it. They need to get out there and do it. When I first got to Germany, only lesbians could learn Wendo, which is a popular form of women's self-defense here. I thought that was ridiculous. I think the theory is that they were too invested in the patriarchy and couldn't do it. I think every woman should learn self-defense. And there are no secret techniques. I was very heavily criticized at the beginning for doing public demonstrations of martial arts and self-defense. I think men should know that women are prepared to defend ourselves and willing to injure or kill in defense of our lives. They should know that. There's no secret techniques. And one of the last important things, that respect is the cornerstone and the foundation of all my teachings, everything I do in the martial arts and in the self-defense. Respect, respect, respect. And if we use that as our guiding principle, we'll be always doing good work. And one of my master instructors once said to me, the best self-defense is always do the right thing. And I thought, well, cool, I like that. I'll use it. My last message is for those of you who are doing empowerment, trying to get funding under the Istanbul Convention, and I don't know how many that are in Europe here. I think it's so important that we keep our eyes on the prize, because in Germany, all the money, until I started opening my mouth, was going to women's shelters and support for women who had experienced violence. I am not fighting for a place in a women's shelter. I am fighting for an end of patriarchy, and we need to keep our goals in mind. What we do is primary prevention. No one else does it, and many people don't even know what this concept means. So read Freeing Our Lives, the brochure that I told you, and find out about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. In Germany, people seem to think that working with men who have committed violence against their wives is primary prevention. It is not. In order to find the population, there has to have been violence. We're not preventing anything. And primary prevention means exactly that we are eliminating the conditions that contribute to violence. And that we do that by empowering women and girls. Lucy Stone, an American feminist, said in 1855, in education, in marriage, in religion, in everything, disappointment is the lot of women. It shall be the business of my life to deepen this disappointment in every woman's heart until she bows down to it no longer. I like that sentiment. I like Lucy Stone's attitude, and that's exactly what I've been doing in my life. As a final, I would like to say there are two organizations that have been really meaningful for me. One is the National Women's Martial Arts Federation. We did a self-defense certification board, and I worked on that for many, many years. I think they do really good work. The second one, and the one that is really near and dear to my heart, is the Association of Women's Martial Arts Instructors. That was a group that grew out of some teachers from the other organization, and it's devoted to women who are teaching. And we have a national conference every year. It's in a different place. Last year it was in New Orleans. I personally never miss one of their conferences because the organization is amazing. We also do some online teachers lounges, they're called. And I would encourage all of you to take a look at it. Take a look at their website. It's AWMAI, I think .org, maybe. Yeah, it's and Nancy says it's .org. So that's great. And as a very last thing, the Women's Martial Arts Festival, International Women's Martial Arts Festival, is held every 2 years in Frankfurt. The next one will be in 2028. I would welcome all of you to come and be a part of that. We're 100 women every year who gather and train with each other for the most powerful, exciting, fun, joyful weekend. I really highly recommend it to all of you. And I have stories, but I will ask if there are questions, and how are we doing on that?
Yes, that's the right time for questions. Thank you, Sunny. I don't see any questions on in the chat. So there is only the link for the book that Ira was mentioning. And there is Anat first raised her hand for a question. Go ahead, Anat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. I was crying through some parts of your story. Very inspiring. I have a question. How did you make it? How did you create self-defense from martial arts? You said there was nobody there to show you. How did you come up with the techniques?
You mean the physical techniques?
Yeah, the physical ones.
There's only so many vulnerable points, and there's only so many weapons, and it doesn't matter what the physical techniques are. I personally think it doesn't matter what the physical techniques are that you teach. You got eyes, nose, throat, groin, knees, do some combination of that and you're fine. I've changed things, over time. I put a little bit more attention to like kind of blocking that I did at the beginning. I was always in kind of a stance like this, like this kind of this kind of a stance. I add a lot of this because I think it's valuable, and I want women to learn to defend themselves and also to be able to strike out of a defensive pose. I don't know. I concentrate a lot on the vulnerable points and not so much on if he grabs you here, you do this and that. And if he grabs you here, you do this and that. I don't think it's useful. And I've also found that nobody in Germany is willing to do a 12-week self-defense course. They're not. They don't do it. And it's gotten worse since Corona. I mean, before Corona, we could at least do maybe a 6-week session, but now we can't even do like a day session, like we're down to 4 hours a day, and people are, that's it. We do our basic course is now 8 hours. It's 4 hours on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday. And we have hundreds of people signed up for those. But anything that we do longer, it starts with a group and then life takes over, and then at the end, we've got very few students in the group, and it's not effective. So I say, do what we can in the time that we got. So I focus a lot on vulnerable points and then just different situations. And I think, and I said before, I think it's so important that women get to smack inanimate objects. We have these big bobs. We have I think we have 6 bobs at our school, these body opponent bags, these huge things from Century Martial Arts. They're great. I love them. Yeah. I also love them because I'm 75 and my thumbs don't want to hold paddles anymore. So, I like having them hit something else. But also, I don't think that's enough. Like I said, I think they should be hitting each other because I want them to feel the impact that they have when they hit. So I don't know, like we learned so much from each other, like we came and we shared and we went and I don't know, it just kind of came up over time. But I do think the crux of what I do is the confrontation training, the visualization, the political work, like I don't do a class where I'm not talking about patriarchy and white supremacy like every 10 seconds. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't care if that's what they came for or not. That's what they're getting, and they're happy. I mean, people are really happy because they a lot of times don't have words, they don't have words to put their experiences in. They don't have a framework, and I give them the whole framework, and
Thanks.
Quick story.
Okay.
I have this here. Oh, yeah, I can't see it.
Oh.
You see this?
Yes.
We had 1,000 cards made. And this is when we first started doing something around street harassment, catcalling. And the card says, "You have just insulted a woman. This card has been chemically treated. Your prick will fall off in 3 days. Women's community to smash sexism." We were so proud of these things. We thought these were the best thing in the world. So we were young. I mean, we were 20, whatever, So we were getting harassed everywhere we went all the time. So we went out with our cards, 1,000 cards. And nobody harassed us. Nobody harassed us. We couldn't wait to give out a card. But I think we were like, I mean, that was the beginning of like, like you go out ready, and nobody gives you any shit, right? And that was us. And we're like, oh man, we got 1,000 cards. So what are we going to do with them? But I think it's important that we also need to instigate our own success, create our own successes. Go to a bar with a whole bunch of women, and wait till somebody gets harassed, and the whole bar of women stands up and goes, "Hey, leave her alone, get your hands off her." It's such a good feeling. And if we don't get it in our lives, then we have to create it. And we did a lot of that. I don't know what it was, 70s, the Rolling Stones came out with a new album called Black and Blue. And the cover picture, Nancy's nodding, the cover picture was a woman with, this kind of heels, and her legs were spread. The band was in between her legs. And the title was, and she was beat up and bound. Yeah, so she was bound and beat up. And the title was, "I'm black and blue for the Rolling Stones and I love it." And we were completely outraged. Yeah. So we said, okay, we got to do something here. I had a great idea. It turned out not so great, but we went to the record stores and there were huge posters of this thing, you know? So we had women go in and say, this is an, you know, we get to the counter, we'd order all, we had, I guess, cassette tapes at the time or something. So we had our cassette tapes and we're all ready to sign out. And then we look at the sign and we go, this is an outrage. This is violence against women. We are not shopping here. And then we would leave. And then we had some more women come in and do the same thing. And then the third group of women came in and said, had like $300 worth of stuff they bought and they had it all ready to check out. And they go, they turned and they were taking down the poster and they didn't know what to do. So they bought like a couple $100 worth of cassette tapes. That was fun. Back in the day. Good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sunny, for all what you shared. You will see in the chat there are a few messages expressing gratitude for you sharing your journey personally, and I'm sure for the whole group. It was really moving, very powerful. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the whole group here and also all ESD network and the ones that will be watching our video later, and very grateful that you participated, and I really hope we keep in touch and we can learn more from you. It's so impressive your whole journey, and not only to learn about the challenges but also to learn about all the projects that you've been founding and that you've been developing. So thank you so much. Resilience and strength is always there, and thank you very much.
I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and then I see that people would like to get in touch, and that's fine. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I appreciate it. You've been a great audience.